Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Dennis Mills with me tonight. He's just published a book, and it's a fascinating book, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair. It's an incredibly interesting read, and it's a memoir. And he ends with a bunch of lessons from his experience. I got to tell you a little bit about Dennis. I'm going to read about the author on the back page. Husband, father, and grandfather. Dennis is a former parliamentarian, small business owner, corporate executive, event organizer, and producer. Dennis remains active in Canadian politics, encouraging people to run for public office, whatever the region in Canada or the level of government. His boundless energy is contagious, and I would agree with that, because he always says, when I ask him, how you doing, Dennis?
Never better.
Never better. The
Never
eternal
better.
optimist. Dennis, thank you so much for sending this book, though, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, a memoir, my way. What motivated you to write it?
So, Brian, 2 years ago, I was visiting a neighbor up here in Muskoka. He had a garage that was near empty, and he was going to let me use it for some storage. And in the back corner of that garage, I looked and I noticed a chair standing up against the wall. In fact, I have the chair here with me. Put it up here, this wooden chair. Can you see it?
Yep.
And I looked at that chair and I turned it around, and on the back, you'll be able to see, it said Chairman Mills.
Chairman Mills.
And I said to my friend George, I said, George, that chair is 75 years old. That's the chair that my grandfather used when he founded the company many years ago. And I said, George, that chair has been at so many different events. The opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, the launching of the Averill Arrow. I said, that chair's been at 1,000 different events. And so he gave it to me. And I came home and I said, you know, if I ever started to put some of my memories together, it would all revolve around that wood chair. And so I started to think about it, and I decided that I was going to put this memoir together because I've been blessed in my journey, whether it be in the business sector or the public sector, of meeting some of the finest people who've taught me many great lessons. And I thought if I could put it together in a colloquial format, then we might be able to inspire younger people to participate in public service. Brian, as you know, I don't come from an academic background. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a Harvard scholar. I'm the son of a dish scraper and a gentleman that made his living renting tables and chairs and dishes for parties and weddings and special events. And I got lucky in my journey that in 1978, I ran into a gentleman by the name of Keith Davey, who liked the project that I did at the Canadian National Exhibition. And he asked me, he and his associate, Jim Coots, asked me to come and work in Ottawa. I'd probably only been to Ottawa once before. And I did go to Ottawa, and it was through that experience that I ultimately became a member of Parliament for 16 years. And this book is a book about the lessons that I've learned about that experience of going from the private sector to the public sector.
Your second section is about this transition, and the first part of it is called Social Events and the Relationships That Blossom. Tell me about social events and how they've impacted your career.
Well, first of all, when you're in the business of serving people, as we did in our family business, Chairman Mills, you ultimately come into contact with people that are sparked with ideas on how to organize social events for all kinds of causes. It could be for charity, it could be to promote a product or whatever. And very specifically, we're heading into November month, November the 11th, around the corner. My grandmother had 3 boys that served, and we'd hear stories that, well, her boys were overseas she would actually go out and load the trucks with other women, and they would do social events to raise money for people during the war as a way to sort of help the wives and everybody who were at home. And fast forward, then you get involved in sponsorship events where a firm like Rothman's will sort of put money up to sponsor tennis tournaments. And you learn from those executives and those marketing uh, experts all types of lessons that you take with you for the rest of your life.
I found it interesting to read that you met Senator Keith Davey almost by accident in Ottawa and didn't realize that he was a senator and he was your neighbor.
Well, that was the break of my life in terms of public service. I was in the press bar in Ottawa with a bureaucrat from the Canadian Government Exhibition Commission. And we were frustrated because we couldn't get any movement on this project for the 100th anniversary of the Canadian National Exhibition. And this bureaucrat, his name was Craig Carpenter, said, if only we could get to somebody like a Keith Davey, Senator Keith Davey. And I said, Keith Davey? I said, what would he have to do with something like this? And he says, oh, he's a very senior advisor to the Prime Minister. And I said, well, Craig, that guy's my neighbor. He lives 2 doors away from me. And he said, what? Yeah, I said, let's call him. And is he, and so Craig found his number there in the press club. And we called, and the secretary came back on the line and said, oh, the senator would love to see you. Here we are in the East Block. Come on over. I didn't even know where the hell the East Block was, I swear. And so the bureaucrat said, don't worry, I know where it is. So we went over there, and Senator Davey looked at our renderings and our drawings for this event at the Canadian National Exhibition, our Canada 100th anniversary, celebrating all the services of the government of Canada. And he said, I really like this project. Have you ever met Coots? And I said, no, Coots, Jim Coots, no. Well, he's the principal secretary to the Prime Minister. And I said, well, I don't know him. And he said, well, I'm going to set up a meeting for you. And he called, and Coots came on the line right away. And he said to us, go over to the Langevin block. I didn't even know where the Langevin block was. And the bureaucrat obviously said, oh, I know where it is. And so we're walking over. And I said to Craig Carpenter, the bureaucrat, I said, why is he sending us to see a secretary? I said, what would a secretary? Oh, that's just an Ottawa expression. Here, the principal secretary to the Prime Minister is a very senior person. So when we went into the Langevin block, Brian, walked upstairs, and I said to Craig, boy, this is a big office for a secretary. And the next thing you know, we got in to see Mr. Coots, showed him the project, and he said, I like this. And he got on the phone to a minister and said, Mr. Mills is here with Mr. Carpenter. Give me the name of someone that will help them get this project executed, and the rest is history. And so we did the project. And from that project, I was in the private sector, of course, when it was all done. And Prime Minister Trudeau was reelected in February 1980. This Jim Coots gentleman called me, met him at Fran's at Yonge and St. Clair, and he said, I'd like you to come to Ottawa. And I said, well, what would I do? I said, I really don't know much about Ottawa. And he said, well, we'd like you to be the senior advisor to the Committee of Cabinet responsible for government communications. And I said, Mr. Coots, I'm sorry, I don't even know what that is. I mean, you're talking, Brian, here about a guy from the private sector hearing cabinet committees and, all this stuff. It was all news to me. And so I said, well, I'll have to go and check with my father because he runs the business and I don't know if I can get away. And so I spoke to my dad that night, and he said it'd be a real honor to go to Ottawa and work for the Prime Minister. And fast forward, that's how my political career began, all around Keith Davey.
What an incredible story. And the stories just keep on coming. I understand that in the book, you've got 50 different people that you reference having special meetings with.
Well, yeah, they're 50 different people. There are a lot more than 50 in the book, but there are some that were really sort of lessons that were so profound. And I want to start with my father. I was 13 years old, Brian. We were on the trucks on a Sunday morning, picking up some tables and chairs in Forest Hill, drove up, and some of my friends from St. Mike's were playing road hockey. We parked the truck, got out, and went and picked up the tables and the chairs. And the guys, some of my classmates, said hello. And there was my dad driving the truck. And as we were leaving, the lady from the house yelled out, Mills, come and take out my garbage. And of course, you could hear her all over the place. And I said, you don't need to take out our garbage. And my father went up and took out her 3 cans of garbage. And when we got back in the truck and left, and I said goodbye to my friends who were playing road hockey, I said, Dad, you really didn't need to take out that garbage. It kind of embarrassed me in front of all my schoolmates. And he turned to me and he said, you'll never be a good business person or a good leader unless you learn how to take out another person's garbage. And that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I've told that story probably 50 times.
In the book, you call it acts of service, the importance of acts of service.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what the service is. If you have to take out someone else's garbage, if you're going to be a great leader, or any kind of a leader, you've got to do it. And it doesn't matter. I mean, there we were using it in a metaphorical sense. Well, we were really taking out the garbage, but it doesn't matter whether it's in business or in politics. There's a lot of time, a lot of moments and times when you've got to do a lot of dirty work.
I think talking about service in today's environment where everyone seems so self-absorbed and self-interested and selfish, that's a great first lesson. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I think it's something that you've done. I've said this before. I had a challenge in business, and I thought the government was going to lose a lot of money on a deal that if they agreed to do it with the wrong individual. And I went up to Ottawa. I met with a couple different people and presented my point of view on this issue. Dennis Mills being one of the members of Parliament that I presented it to. And Dennis, you listened, you understood, and you went to bat for me. And I thank you for that. And that was an act of service because there was no benefit for you in it other than, frankly, saving the Canadian taxpayer a lot of money. But you did a great service. And so I really appreciate that, sir.
Well, that's kind of you to bring that up, Brian. I think that people don't realize the joy you experience when you are in the business of service, public service especially. And my hope in this memoir is to inspire younger people to consider it as a part of their journey in life. And I think it's needed more than ever right now. And this book gives examples of some of the things that you can do and can achieve when you are given the trust of a community to be elected, whether it be at the municipal level or the provincial level, federal level in my case. And I find, Brian, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I find a lot of members of Parliament today do not realize the opportunity that they have to affect change when they're sitting in the House of Commons. I call it the nation's boardroom. A lot of them don't realize that underneath that House of Commons is a big engine. And that big engine contains all the departments of the government of Canada and all the agencies, whether it be in industry, whether it be heritage, whether it be health, whether it be the Arctic challenges, environmental challenges. That government of Canada has that big engine. And when you're elected to the Parliament of Canada, you have the right to pick up the phone and call any deputy minister that's in charge of that particular part of the engine and say, my constituents want to know about this. one of the great fun experiences that I had as an MP from the Toronto Danforth area, we had the beginnings of the motion picture industry in our community. And the Mercopoulos family had a small little studio down on Eastern Avenue. And I discovered how skilled some of those jobs were in the motion picture industry. And so I would push on a continual basis that the industry that is making movies in Canada would be supported by the government of Canada. And and by the time I left as a member of parliament, the government of Canada was investing almost $1 billion a year in the motion picture industry through tax grants and through other grants of stimulating the business. And as you know, right now, Canada is ranked as one of the top places in the world to produce feature films and series.
Well, congratulations and thank you for that. And I guess the underlying comment that you made is that there's this great opportunity members of parliament have to provide service to the constituents. I would go farther and say, and it's their job. That's what we elect them for. That's what we want them to do. That's their occupation. So I would encourage them to do it, because I think too many of them just wait till the PMO tells them what to do. And you were an example of someone that did something very different. You walked your own path, and thank you for that. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Dennis Mills talking about his newly published book, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, a memoir, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Dennis Mills today. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Wire. My guest tonight is Dennis Mills, talking about his career, but also talking about a book that he's recently published called From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, a memoir. And it's got lots of conversations in it about lessons learned and experiences that he's had over his life and his career. And I got to say, I really enjoyed breezing through this. Dennis, I appreciate you sending it to me. I think it's a great read with some great lessons. And the very next one, right after you're focusing on service, is a story about, I think it's your Aunt Lois, and focusing that nothing replaces person-to-person interactions. And you talk about the importance of telephone calls, which is a lost art in today's world when we text all the time. Tell us about the person-to-person interactions that you think are so critically important.
Well, Brian, I'm so glad that you brought this point up about my Aunt Lois and the phone. This goes back to when I was obviously very young and in the family business, Chairman Mills. In those days, the only thing you had to take an order was the phone. There were no faxes, or, there was no internet, obviously, and so no emails. So my Aunt Lois would teach us that when you're on the phone, your voice, the customer measures your voice in terms of trust and confidence in giving you that very specific order, for whether it be a wedding or a bar mitzvah or a fashion show runway or for the launch of a product. And if your ability is short, or if you don't come across on the phone in a way that the person can get that confidence, then it really can fracture your ability to be effective in the job of servicing that customer. And so I've never forgot that message from my Aunt Lois. And fast forward today, Brian, you mentioned a lost art. It shouldn't be an art. It should just be something that we take for granted. But last week, 2 weeks ago, I went to an MP's office to try and help out an old constituent from many years ago. The front of the office said they were open, but they weren't. The phone number was there. I called. I couldn't get anybody. I called several times, couldn't get through. And then I finally said, you know what, I'm going to do a little exercise. I called 10 MP's offices. Nobody answered the phone. You think I'm exaggerating? I would challenge any of your listeners or anybody.
Call 10 MPs.
Go and get, call 10 MPs and find and I'll tell you the one that does that, the MP, and I'm not talking about reading the MP answering the phone themselves, somebody on their staff. And by the way, I'm not just saying their constituency office, even their Ottawa office. So the world has totally changed, because it seems that for me the phone was a vital organ of interaction and doing business, and people having confidence in your voice and your commitment, your passion, whatever. And so today it's almost like who uses the phone? It's all texts or emails or whatever. And I'm sorry, I'm from a different school, and I can tell you right now, 5 days a week, we always had somebody on our phones on the Danforth, and many Saturdays, and this again is area where I think it's a lesson that I've learned, and if I were sort of coaching a young person becoming an effective MP, I would say, please learn how to answer a phone, and please teach your staff how to answer a phone. Now, does that sound basic or almost crazy that we're having this discussion? But I'm
Yes.
telling you right now, answering a phone is really a lost exercise.
I worked for Jim Pattison for a while out in Vancouver, and he had a rule: every call needs to be returned in 24 hours. He says, not only do you answer it, but if someone calls, no matter who they call, you got to call back, and you got to call back within 24 hours. That was his rule. And if you didn't do it, you were in trouble with Jimmy Pattison. I've got to read a paragraph, if it's okay, on the next lesson, because it's one of those things that, you've said all the time, never better. And I never, until last night when I was reading your book, knew the story of where it came from. So do you mind if I read you this paragraph from your book? I guess this is a gentleman that was working on one of your events, Stuart. And
Yeah, Stuart Lawson.
And I guess the event had a bunch of problems, and an inspector came, and Stuart took a very positive attitude toward what was going on. And you said, how could you possibly tell those guys that everything was never better just 1 hour after we were condemned? And Stuart explained to you, Dennis, let me tell you a little story. I was raised during the Great Depression, when a lot of people were going through a lot of suffering. And I discovered during that time that there were two types of people in life: those who walk around and complain publicly about all their hardships in their life. And then there are the others who have a positive attitude, who get their work done and try and make the best of every situation. That's when I decided, Dennis, that whenever someone says hello to me and asks me how I'm doing, I would say, never better. Nobody really cares about all the troubles you have. People only want to hear a positive response.
Stuart Lawson.
And you,
yes,
that day, decided that you would change your salutation to always saying never better. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm, my cottage is called Never Better. I mean, I believe in that. That was one of the best. That's an example of one of the best lessons that I learned in my life from Stuart Lawson. And Stuart Lawson, we bought his business when he was 69 years old. He had a portable grandstand business, a bleacher business. And I said, Stuart, we'll buy the business, but you've got to stay on for 5 years. And Stuart was such a positive influence. He stayed on our payroll till he was 85 years old. And then, of course, you can't reverse the aging process, but he was just a remarkable man. And I can tell you right now that saying never better, even when you have lots of challenges that you're carrying on your shoulders, is a much more effective way of getting through and collaborating with people than sort of moaning and bitching about all the little issues and problems you have.
And then I guess in your business career, you morphed from just event rentals to special events, and that you describe that as an important sort of evolution. Tell us about the importance of special events.
Well, it's I guess it was Vince Lombardi that used to say, when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you're rotting. And so we had a slow period at one of our branch in Hamilton one summer, and we decided that in order to create some activity, because we had staff on the payroll, etc., well, let's create our own special event and let's bring in the Beach Boys and put on a concert at the Wentworth Curling Club. Normally, there'd be a promoter to bring in the band, and then we'd supply the staging and the chairs and all the other stuff, the scaffolding. And so we did this event with the Beach Boys, and it went very well, of course. And then fast forward, that led to other people saying, oh, could you do some design work for us here, promoting our Carlsberg brand of beer? This was with Canadian breweries. And it was really Canadian breweries, Wilma Tennyson, who got us into the special event business. They had rented a building at the Canadian National Exhibition. It was the old Ontario government building. And we started doing special events where we would design and manufacture exhibits and organize them in a way that they were, public events, but sponsored by major corporations. And that's how the special event division grew. And it became quite a strong, significant part of our business.
You talk about these events, and it's kind of fun. You talk about the Canada's first papal visit, 40,000 people at the Olympic Games in Montreal, 34,000 square foot stage, and 1,800 VIPs for Constitution Day on the repatriation and signing the Canadian Constitution, 8,000 guests at the Toronto Eden Centre. Lots of different interesting events, and yet your lesson from that. And you say the wood chair period taught me the importance of communication in building and nurturing authentic relationships with people. Dennis, we're talking about business, and you think you had to build and nurture authentic personal relationships in business?
Absolutely. And let me give you you've touched on another very important point, and let me give you a very specific example. Very young, used to set up the chairs and the staging and other ancillary products for a young gentleman by the name of Michael Cole, who was a rock and roll promoter. I think we were both teenagers at the time. And so that experience where he grew, and we ended up doing all kinds of chairs for his major events, for the 20 concerts a year he put on at the Canadian National Exhibition. And so when you're a servant to the customer, in this particular case, Michael Cole, you're nowhere near the stage, you're nowhere near the front. You're always kind of off to the side or up in the stands, making sure everything is right. And invariably, the promoter of the event would be in the same sort of position. He would be worried about making sure that his particular event came off properly. And because of that experience, you develop familiarity and you develop relationships with your customer. And that relationship, the Michael Cole relationship, which went on along with Bill Ballard, went on for many, many years. And fast forward, when we had in 2003 our challenge with SARS in Toronto, where all of our hotels were less than 20% occupancy, and our pubs and restaurants were empty. And I was asked by my caucus colleagues to work with a business group in Toronto. I was elected at the time. And these gentlemen were very, very good, but they wanted to work on a marketing program for not 2003, but for the following year. And I said, guys, my 300 restaurants in the Toronto Danforth area, they won't survive a year with the way things are. So I was excused. And I got in my car and I went up to Michael Cole's office. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. Went up to the 4th floor. His office was right across the street from the Hare Krishna building there on Avenue Road. And I looked at him and I said, look, Michael, the city has been good to us. I said, you've got the stones. Now, can you imagine from a small park out in the west side of city when we were teenagers, where he'd have small bands, and now he's the manager of the Rolling Stones. And I said to him, if you could get the Stones, I think I can deliver the government of Canada. And we stage an event here that would have global reach. And he said, Dennis, I like that idea. Let me talk to the boys tonight and I'll see what we can do. They were on tour in Europe. The following morning, a fax came through, Brian, and it essentially said that the boys are committed to do the show. So I said to Michael on the phone, and I said, Michael, I've got to leak this fax. And he says, you know, I don't like doing that. And I said, Michael, you got to trust me. And he said, okay, but I'm very edgy about it. So I called Mike Duffy, who was the then bureau chief, the Ottawa bureau chief for CTV National News. And I said, Michael, I have a letter in my hand where the Rolling Stones are committed to come to Toronto to help us out of this SARS mess. And so he had a camera crew there in about 15 minutes. Now, Brian, for the next 2 days, I was slaughtered because everybody thought that I was promoting that the government of Canada give the Rolling Stones $10 million. That's not what I was promoting, but that's the way the media and everybody portrayed it. So finally, I went on a radio show, CFRB, and said, what if the private sector just paid the artists and the government paid the security, the washrooms, the staging? People had no problem with that. And fast forward, Dan O'Neill from Molson's stepped up and they took on the entertainment. But the point that I want to make, which is what you started with, had Michael and I not had that history of me serving him. When I say me, our team, Chairman Mills, serving him, supporting him, had he not had the exposure of seeing my work ethic and my commitment, I don't think he would have made that extra effort, even though it was for not just Toronto, but Canada. But it's that those relationships sometimes from a business experience can be so tight and so strong that almost anything can be accomplished. And that is the message that I gave in building those strong relationships in business.
If I could, for one more minute, you used the adjective authentic. And I think so many people have relationships, but they're not necessarily authentic. And what makes them authentic? And why use that word, that adjective, authentic, personal relationships?
Well, because you can almost, you almost know each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses. You know, and you're not embarrassed to sort of talk about things that you cannot accomplish. You know, like I can maybe get this done, but I really can't do that because that's not my strength. I mean, an authentic relationship is where you're transparent with the other person and just put everything on the table and not be afraid to sort of show where the pain point is in trying to get the project done. And when you have an authentic relationship, you can put all of those things right in front of the other person, and the other person can put their concerns in front of you without anybody sort of feeling in any way, shape, or form that they're inferior. That's just the way you get stuff done, by being transparent with each other.
We're going to take a break and come back in 2 minutes with Dennis Hills, and we're going to turn to his political career from his business career. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Dennis Mills is my guest tonight, a former member of Parliament, and he's written a really interesting book called From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, a memoir that's just been published this past week. And we've talked a little bit about, you know, your business career and how you got introduced to Keith Davey and Jim Coots. And one of the first chapters in that section, Dennis, is a chapter called Drafted and the Importance of Apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is not a word that people use a lot today.
Well, it should be used a lot, and it shouldn't be taken as any kind of an inferior or a subservient sort of role. In my case, my apprenticeship on Parliament Hill was as a junior advisor uh, to starting off with the then minister responsible for the Cabinet Committee on Communications, Jim Fleming, and then from there into the Prime Minister's senior staff. But we were young, late 30s, and we were learning all about how a government works. And in that experience, I discovered many others of my age and my sort of background, not necessarily from the service industry like mine, but others who were educated in very specialized areas, whether it be the environment or whether it be manufacturing or whatever. And these were all young people that, because of that apprenticeship experience, some of them, a lot of them, went on to become members of Parliament or even senior officials in various levels of government, not just federal, provincial. And I believe that if a young person today were to ever get the chance of working for an MP or working for a councillor or an MPP at the provincial level, I think that that's one of the greatest experiences a young person could have. And it's from that apprenticeship experience you can decide whether or not you have the interest or the capacity or the drive to eventually get into elected politics. But apprenticeship, in my mind, is step number one.
One of the first things you worked on, I understand, was a word mark for Canada, a brand for Canada. Really?
So this is this is where an example of where the private sector and my background in working for people like Rothmans and Canadian breweries came to help me when I got involved in government. The government of Canada in 1980, late spring or fall, had committed, Brian, about $140 million to a company in Toronto, west side of Toronto, called Spar Aerospace. They were the builders of the space arm, Canada's space arm. And I said to our minister, Jim Fleming, Jim, and it was in his writing, Spar Aerospace, I said, we should get them to put the Canada word mark on that space arm in exchange for the $140 million we're giving them, taxpayers' money. And he says, that's a great idea. And so Jim reached out to the president. His name was Shepard at the time. And he said, we'd like this word mark. And this word mark actually came from the department in industry that did all of our tourism work. And wherever Canada went doing trade shows or promoting Canada, this is the Canada with the flag over the A, Brian. I'm sure you've seen it 1,000 times. And so Spar Aerospace accepted that they put the word mark on the space arm, and the rest is history. As you know, when that space arm opened up with that Canada word mark, that was one real blast of joy for all Canadians. But fast forward, we took that word mark and we decided that there were so many Canadians, Brian, that had no idea of the services that the government of Canada provided for Canadians. For example, in Western Canada, when we were suffering from alienation, we discovered over 1,000 buildings and services, from agricultural research stations to correctional institutions to immigration offices to industry offices, excuse me, all across Canada that had no government of Canada symbol. So the Prime Minister agreed that anything and everything where the government of Canada had a presence or was providing a service that we put that Canada word mark on it. And I'll never forget, we were having a very, very difficult time with the Crow's Nest Pass, getting grain from the west to Thunder Bay. And the government of Canada spent almost $2 billion on grain cars. And to this day, Brian, if you look at cars going back and forth from the west, you'll see the Canada word mark on those grain cars. And the whole purpose behind this was to remind Canadians that the various services of the government of Canada, sometimes, you've got to appreciate them, even though they're not in your face. You've got to be reminded that the government of Canada is present. A lot of people don't realize that the Post Office, Post Canada, is an agency of the government of Canada. And so once you put that Canada word mark on every post office and every post truck, all of a sudden Canadians had a better attitude towards Post Canada. That's the story of the word mark.
So the brand is not everything, but it's something.
The brand. Yes.
You end this chapter with a long section about the Last Supper. And I'd forgotten about that. Tell us all about the Last Supper.
Well, the Last Supper was, well, let's go back to what prompted the Last Supper. Senator Davey is probably one of the best political minds that I've ever been exposed to, and a never better person, a very positive person. He wrote the book called The Rainmaker, and it was in September of 1983. Brian, we were at 21 in the polls. We had 13% unemployment, 12% inflation. Pierre Trudeau was not very popular. And so Senator Davey wanted to have this massive fundraiser in Toronto. And he asked if I would put a team together to go to Toronto and work on it. We wanted to have it done before Christmas. And I put a team together, and it was just a great group of people who were passionate about all the good work that Pierre Trudeau had done. And we organized a supper for 4,000 people at the Automotive Building at the Canadian National Exhibition. We had a 2-tiered head table. And of course, a lot of people wanted the Prime Minister to resign. And he was, of course, always joking, well, the people that are here tonight, it might be your last supper, but it's not going to be mine. And he was very solid. And he gave a speech that night without a note for 30 minutes with a head table that was something that all of Canada could be proud of, because there were people there from every political persuasion, every walk of life. And interestingly enough, not that we had any knowledge of this, but in February '84, the following year, he took his walk in the snow and resigned. But the memory for me of his final months in office as the leader was the Last Supper.
We're going to take a break, a last break, and come back with a few last thoughts from Dennis Mills about his book and his career from the wood chair to the green chair, a memoir. Dennis Mills, stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Dennis Mills. He's a former member of Parliament, a gentleman that I've got a ton of respect for. I've walked door to door with him in Toronto Danforth campaigning and seen how he would bound up steps and be willing to take on conversation with anyone. I can remember people in your riding that had signs for your opponent, and you still wanted to meet with them, talk to them, and try to persuade them. And I remember canvassing with you with my young son at the time, and you treated him with incredible respect and friendship, and I appreciated that. And I think you launched him on a career of political interest. So thank you, Dennis. You've got a whole nother section that we haven't even got to in this book, and we're going to run out of time. But there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about too that really stuck out at me in this last section. Volunteers are the glue and the privilege of trust. Could you talk about those two?
Oh, no volunteers, you don't have a motor in your political engine. The volunteers are so critical. The volunteers do everything from phone calls to mailings, to emails, to signs, to walking the streets with you, marking lists, being there on election day to make sure that you're tracking your vote. It's just a very simple sentence, but it's so powerful when you say volunteers are the glue. No volunteers, then you don't have an engine and you don't get elected. So I cannot emphasize that enough. And Brian, as I said from the beginning, the objective of this book for me personally, it's not so much about selling a bunch of books. That's not the objective. The objective here is to interest people like your son, who can get involved in public service and public life, and then get elected. And the one little difference that I would say today, when I started, there were only probably about 100 lobbyists in Ottawa when I first went to Ottawa. Today you have over 8,000. And young people today would rather be a lobbyist than a member of parliament. I tell this story about a few months ago. I met a bunch of CEOs in Toronto, about 10 of them. Not one of them could name their MP, but they could all name their lobbyist. Brian, we need to change this. We need to get younger people involved in elected politics, or even working in elected people's offices, to learn how the machine, I call it the machinery of government, but underneath that office, and most MPs even today don't realize this, they have access to this big motor with all these various components in it that are there to serve people. And if you work with bureaucrats on behalf of your constituents and reach out to them and say, look, you got to help me find this person's lost pension check, or you got to help me on this immigration case, or you need to help this small business because he's getting beaten up by his bank. Those are all parts of the machinery of government that members of parliament and their assistants need to know how to use. And that is why people elect you, to use that machinery of government to service their riding.
One of the chapters that really spoke to me was a chapter called The Privilege of Trust. And you talked about the 1988 election that was almost a single issue election on free trade, and that the Conservatives won that election. John Turner and the Liberals lost that election and lost the argument on free trade, but you won. How did you win against that big tide?
Well, we won for two reasons. And both of these reasons are as relevant today as they are in 1988. I ran because I didn't support, and I've never had a bad word with Brian Mulroney, but I didn't support his decentralizing the national government. I am a passionate believer in a strong national government. And the Meech Lake Accord was a part of that campaign. And so that was issue number one. But the second issue was free trade agreement. I never believed in unlimited, unfettered foreign investment in Canada. I just believed that we needed to have more control, direct control on our manufacturing. And so that was a part of the free trade agreement that I didn't like. But the real part of the free trade agreement, and Brian, I'm so happy you touched on this. The issue that I believe got me elected was water, water, water. I said water is a part of this free trade agreement. The US negotiator, Clayton Yoder, wrote his PhD thesis on the replumbing of North America. And I believe today, as passionately as I did in 1988, that the Americans are going to come at us and they're going to get after and access to our water. And unless we in the House of Commons And we all around the members of parliament or whoever is running the place, if they don't get their heads around water, then before you know it, you're going to have somebody from the States, a leader, God forbid it's somebody like Trump, who's already stated, if I get elected, I'm coming after Canada's water. And I'm telling you, Brian, if we don't collaborate and cooperate on that, he'll just call in 100 CEOs from the US and say, shut down your manufacturing plants in Canada. So I think that when you talk about trust, when you have an issue that you've campaigned on and that got you elected, you never let it go. And so here we are in 2024 on Brian Crombie's radio show, and we're talking about the same issue back then. You never let it go. You stick with it. And I'm telling you right now, Brian, if we could wake up one MP on this interview to the issue of water, we'd be doing a great service, and that's how you maintain trust.
We're almost out of time. Last question. You quote Pierre Trudeau, and the quote is, "A country is something that is built every day out of certain basic shared values. And so it is in the hands of every Canadian to determine how well and wisely we should build the country of the future." Do we still have shared values today? Are we still building the Canada of the future today?
Well, I think we're going through a period where we're lackadaisical. I want to be very diplomatic about this. I think Canadians, in general, need to wake up and get involved in what's going on in the country. I think there's too much apathy right now in terms of, it's like these 10 CEOs that didn't know who their MP was. That to me is just totally strange. I think that Canadians, if they're not more active in the political process, then we're going to end up having a country that will go sideways. You and I both know, and we're both positive people, it's no fun looking at over 200 parks in downtown Toronto with tents all over them. Well, that's not just a city problem. That's all levels of government problem. And that's where I think the populist apathy is really at the root cause of all this happening. If you do not make your MP or your MPP or your city councillor, if you don't get active and make them accountable, then you're not doing your job as a citizen. And that's the message that Pierre Trudeau was giving us back in 1984.
Dennis Mills, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for writing this book, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, a memoir. You know, I think that it is a wonderful read for several reasons, but, you know, number one, it's a story of your life and your experiences, which is interesting. Number two, it references so many other interesting people, and you've got little vignettes and stories about so many interesting people. That's fun. But unlike a lot of memoirs, you really do bring out some lessons learned that I think are incredibly helpful to all of us. And so I appreciate that, and I commend it as a great read to anyone that's interested in Canada, in politics, in business, and in making a difference in our society. Dennis Mills, thank you so much.
Yeah. Ryan, can I give a plug? Go to Ben McNally bookstores on Queen, and that's where it's available. Ben McNally.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Bala at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.